And we are back. Good morning, everybody. I am Mike with Obviously Outdoorsmen. It is Friday again. Thank you for tuning in to FLT number 8 or First Light Talks. Today's topic, meat hunter or trophy hunter. But as usual, let's get into the current news article. And today's comes from Outdoor Life. And the title of this article is Mississippi hunter kills a 146-inch buck 2 days after her husband missed it. Victoria Garland shot an incredible 9-pointer with a Remington 700, and here's the story behind that. On Xmas Day, or Christmas Day, her husband Thomas got a long shot at the same buck, but missed. So on Christmas Day, he goes out and he sees this thing. He has cameras all over the property, and this is one of the biggest bucks that he has coming in. And he finally got a shot on Christmas Day, and it was a long shot, but he ended up missing it. And 2 days later, on an unusually hot day, Victoria was sitting in her ground blind when this buck happened to step out 173 yards away. And according to Victoria, she could shoot this Remington 700 out to like 400 yards on a dime. So 173 yards away, this buck steps out, and she settles her pin or her sight, and she takes a shot at it, and she misses it. The buck doesn't move. So she takes a shot at this thing, and the buck just stands still. 146-inch giant buck just doesn't move. So what does she do? Like any logical hunter would, reload another shell and send another one down range. And she says that the deer just ran off, didn't really look like it was hit. And they went out to where the buck was standing. They didn't really have much blood at all, or if any. So they got one of their dogs in, and the deer only went about 100 yards. But without the dog, would have been almost impossible for them to find, with having zero blood to go off of. So she ended up getting the deer. And it's amazing how sometimes it's just not meant to be. All right. This guy goes out. He takes a long shot on one of the biggest bucks on the property. And it kind of reminds me of Talladega Nights. It's like, hey, maybe sometimes you slingshot me up in there.
Awesome if, like, you could slingshot me in for a win.
Yeah, but if you won, how am I going to win?
Yeah.
Think about it.
No, I was thinking about it.
And, well, if you win, how am I going to win? So the husband takes a shot on this buck, one of the biggest bucks on the property, and he ended up missing it, and it comes full circle with his wife ended up taking this very nice big buck. So it's just not meant to be sometimes. Kind of like last year for me and Rob hunting up in northern New Jersey on one of our properties. We had a buck that I call Lefty. I ended up taking him this year, this fall bow. And last year, this was one of the best bucks on the property. He was very patternable. He was in like every day. He was in during the light a lot. But every time we hunted him, he always just somehow knew we were there. He either caught our wind or he was bedding in an area to where he just watched us come in and knew it wasn't safe to come in. So we tried multiple times last year to get on this deer, trying to get Rob on this deer, and it just did not pan out. We had a couple deer drives to where he came through and he was just a little too far away, or he slipped out the back door and he just didn't come through. So this year, when he shows up on camera, he's literally the exact same as last year, just wider with a little bit more mass. So he probably put on 20 inches of antler from last year. That might be an exaggeration, but maybe 10 to 20 inches of antler from last year from mass and a little bit more on the spreads. And I ended up going one of the first drives we did, deer drives. I shoot a doe, and then I end up shooting this buck. And he comes through, and I have cell cams out all over New Jersey. When I'm down in Florida, Rob's baiting them, and he's managing all the northern properties. So I'm down here, and I just go up there, and this deer comes in, and I immediately recognize him from last year. And he comes through, and I smoke this deer at like 15 yards. So sometimes it's just not meant to be, and sometimes it's for the best, because if we would have shot this deer last year, he would have been significantly smaller, even though he had a very, very cool rack. But I ended up taking him this year. I only had a week to hunt in New Jersey, and it was a very fulfilling experience, being that I didn't do a lot of the scouting or baiting or prep work this year, but I was still able to go up there and get it done. So that basically ties into meat hunter or trophy hunter right there. We'll get right into the topic of the day. But first off, congratulations, Victoria, on your 146-inch buck that your husband missed. Congratulations on getting that one. But just like in that story I just said with me shooting Lefty, the velvet buck I shot this fall bow, it ties into, is it meat hunting or trophy hunting? So I want to clear up on my definition of a trophy hunter, and then what the actual definition of a trophy hunter is on how most people see it. So for me, a trophy hunter, it's more like paying a lot of money for a guarantee harvest. So something like you're paying buku dollars to go shoot an elephant or a big game animal or a lion, or even just a fenced in ginormous buck, like a 200-inch just behemoth. That's my definition of trophy hunting. If you have to pay all this money and going out there for almost a guaranteed harvest, versus what everyone thinks that just if you go out and hunt these deer or any animal, that it's trophy hunting, that you're just trying to shoot the biggest of any species, the oldest and biggest of any species, and that's your trophy. You're willing to pay any amount of money just to just have this mount on your wall, that you don't eat it, you just want the hide or the bragging rights, just say you killed it. And that's not really true at all. I mean, I'm sure there's some people in this world that just shoot animals just to have them mounted for taxidermy on the wall for show, and just to say, I have the money and I paid to kill this lion. And I'm not for that either, okay? But there is a time and a place for it. If it's helping conservation out and it's helping protect that whole species, like if it's a lion or giraffe or zebra, whatever it is. But for me, trophy hunting, it kind of resonates with like Africa and like big game animals. It doesn't really sit in more whitetail deer land, even though if you pay for a high fenced 200-inch hunt, then that kind of sits with trophy hunting with me. But really, the main difference between meat hunting and trophy hunting is that trophy hunting normally has a selection process around it, meaning passing up like legal animals, so a spike or a 4-pointer or a young 6-pointer, whatever it is, but in general, passing up legal animals to possibly get a chance at a more mature male or female in certain cases. So like for bear, sometimes just the bigger bear, sometimes you're passing up young like 100-pounders or 200-pounders because you have like an 800-pound boar black bear coming in, and that's your target because it's the biggest and oldest and the baddest. So the people that say I'm meat hunting, when you're passing up any animals, then are you really meat hunting? Because you're making a selection process. So if you're passing up does to shoot a buck when you have a buck tag or a doe tag available, then are you really meat hunting? So in a way, most of the modern hunters are a mix between a meat hunter and a trophy hunter. Because especially with me, and I can only speak for myself, yes, I do try and go out there and I try and harvest the biggest buck I could possibly get in that year. But if something cool comes by, just like how Lefty did this year, my velvet buck again, just how he came by, I ended up taking him because he was a very cool buck that I was very happy with, and the meat tastes just the same. So if you're a meat hunter and you pass up any amount of animals, then in a way you are a trophy hunter because you're waiting to shoot a more mature or a better animal. And I love the people that say, well, I hunt essentially for food. That is it, and primarily that's all it's about. It's for food. Well, if you're saying you only hunt for food and you don't care about anything else, and that's the only way you support your family is through like game animals, like, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the taste of venison and elk and pheasant and the everything. I love game animals. I love the way they taste. And the people that say they do all this stuff, but they own like a $1,200 compound bow, and then you have to buy $80 arrows, and then $40 or $50 broadheads, and then lighted nocks that cost like $30 for a 2 or 3 pack, and then don't forget the bow case, and don't forget a sight and a rest, and everything comes out to like well over $2,000 after tags and the bow and the equipment and the camo and the gas to get you there. It would just be way cheaper to go down to like Outback Steakhouse or Longhorn Steakhouse and just pick yourself up the biggest steak that they possibly sell, and it would be far cheaper than actually hunting. So are you really just a meat hunter, and are you just trying to support your family on just meat, or is there an aspect to where there's a trophy type ego thing involved? Because for me, I have about 3 or 4 deer that are over Pope and Young that I've taken in New Jersey. So that's over 125 inches of antler for the people that don't know what Pope and Young is. There's Pope and Young and there's Boone and Crockett, and I've shot in 3 or 4 deer that's over Pope and Young. But I have taken plenty and plenty of deer that are under Pope and Young, just 8-pointers and 6-pointers and 4-pointers. I have taken plenty of deer. I have paid my dues in small buck land, and all venison ends up tasting the same. So especially out of New Jersey, where in most zones across the state, there is an unlimited doe tag. So if you wanted to take advantage of it, you can just absolutely shoot the shit out of every doe you possibly see and just fill the tags with it because it's unlimited does in certain zones. So if you're a meat hunter, then why aren't you doe hunting? If you pass up a doe and you have a doe tag, why are you waiting for a buck if you're just meat hunting? So they kind of make it required for early bow. So it opens before most of the seasons in New Jersey for early bow. It'll open like 2 weeks or 3 weeks beforehand, to where you have to shoot a doe before you shoot a buck. And do I agree with the early bow season? I like the early bow season because it's the deer are still in their summer pattern, so it's easier to get on them once it hits fall and they start separating away from their pattern. It's a little harder to kill them. But there's also a downside of it being normally extremely hot, and you could hunt in shorts, and the mosquitoes are just whacking you worse than turkey season, how it was this year. It was like 85 degrees during early bow, or 90 degrees, and we had to be in long pants, a hoodie, face masks. It's just our eyes are showing. We needed to have gloves on, and if we didn't have the thermocell going, then we were going deaf in both of our ears because of the coming from the mosquitoes. So there's pros and cons to the early bow season in New Jersey. But back to meat hunter versus trophy hunter, because every hunter wants to talk about the bigger buck that they killed. And normally, like I would say 98%, maybe less, because let's say 85% of hunters, they want to talk about how they shot this big buck and this awesome buck. But if someone comes up to me and they say, hey, I took my first deer this year and I shot a spike or a doe or a 4-pointer, or even if they say, and you know what's funny? The people that they don't care about the antler size and they just shoot whatever walks by them, then they try and play it down. Like, I didn't really have anything big this year, but I ended up shooting this tiny forkhorn, like this tiny 4-pointer. And it's like, well, why are you playing down that deer? Because to me, every single animal I harvest is a trophy. That's just how it is. If I'm able to perfect my shot from practice, and then I could apply it in the field, and I end up taking an animal's life and then eating it, then that is a trophy for me. I find a spike the same as a 10-pointer. And once the harvest and the shot is made, then that's how it is. I've had some super memorable times on smaller bucks just because of the shot I made on them versus some of my bigger bucks because maybe it wasn't a perfect shot. It was definitely a good shot, but not a perfect shot. Like Rob's first buck, he shot a spike. All right. We tried getting him on a bigger buck. There were plenty of chances of us trying to do it. And when Rob took this shot on the spike, he came through on a drive, and Rob put the absolute 10 ring shoot through like a wedding ring shot. Like perfect, couldn't get any better. And the way Rob explains it, it just hit him right behind the shoulder in the armpit. The leg was forward, and as that thing hit, the blood just poured out, and it was just an absolute highway of blood for as long as I could see till the deer went out of sight. And when I came through, I was like, yeah, this deer's dead. Look at this blood trail. He has such an insane story on that, and it was a spike. And then his second buck that he takes is a 6-pointer. All right. And to most people, it's probably not a trophy because it's not an absolute giant or an older deer, but it's Rob's second deer or second buck for that matter. And it was another perfect shot, a little higher than my liking, but it was a double lung. The deer went down in like 10 yards. So it was a very, very ethical shot, double lung. And I think he feels better about the spike shot than he did about his 6-pointer shot. It's probably a more memorable deer for him. So it all comes down to a mindset thing, because it doesn't matter, meat hunter, trophy hunter, whatever it may be. It all depends on who's ragging on you and if you're ragging on other people for shooting small deer. Because back then, even with my dad hunting, he was born in the 60s, and most of his hunting took place in the 80s. And any buck you shot was a trophy. All right, I don't know if that's an old-timey mindset of any buck is a good buck, but TV may have ruined that once it got more popular, when it was like, this is how you grow a 200-inch buck, and you gotta let the young ones grow, let them grow theory. And it's kind of sad because in a way it has put in a hurting on returning hunters and new hunters getting into it and beginner hunters, because I've heard a couple of stories. I haven't heard a lot. I've probably heard about 2 or 3 stories to where new hunters got into the sport, and you know what? I've seen this a lot of times on like Facebook hunting groups, to where a new hunter gets in and they learn the sport and they learn how to shoot, and they shoot like the first buck they see, because that's their goal, is to finally get their first deer or their first doe, whatever it is. And they whack like maybe a 2-year-old 4-pointer, and they post it, and they are super, super proud, and they're hyping it up. They're like, yay, I just shot my first buck. And then the whole comment section is a bunch of like seasoned hunters that are just bashing the shit out of this guy because he didn't shoot a Boone and Crockett buck. And it's just amazing to me, because if he just took his first buck, it doesn't matter what the size it is. All right, that is an absolute trophy for this man or woman or child, whatever it may be. It's a trophy for him. So does it really matter in the end of the day? It's all a personal preference thing. And one of the funny things to me is a lot of people try and push antler restrictions. So it's like every state should have an antler restriction, whether it's 3-point to one side or the main beam has to be over a certain length, blah, 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 just to get the deer to grow bigger. Now, obviously, if you let the young ones grow, or let them grow, then the more young ones you let go, then there's going to be a more constant, maturer buck, because they're not all going to make it to 5-6 years old, whether it may be cars hitting them or other hunters shooting them, or just them dying by predators, whatever it may be. They're not all going to make it there. So a lot of times, the trophier hunters. So if we're going to say like 5, so if we have a 0 out of 10 scale, let's say 5 is right in the middle of a meat hunter and trophy hunter, and then 0 is a meat eater, and then 10 or 0 is a meat hunter and 10 is a trophy hunter, then if you're passing up bucks to get the most or the biggest buck in your area, then you're a little over the meat hunter side to the trophy hunter side. And it doesn't really, if you're letting the young ones go and your neighbor shoots it, then that's just how it's going to be sometimes. So if you're a little more of a trophy hunter than a meat hunter, then sometimes you're going to have to eat your tags. And a lot of times people are, oh, I'm going to shoot the biggest buck. Don't shoot a small buck, blah, blah, blah. The entire season. And then like once it gets to crunch time and they haven't shot a mature trophy buck, then 5 days before the end of the season, where they either got to eat their tag or use their tag, they use their tag on whatever buck comes in because they want to have meat in the end of the day. So their main goal is meat. If they don't want to use or lose their tag, if their main goal is meat, then just shoot. You could have shot that buck 2 weeks ago when it was mid-season, but you were waiting for a big buck. So it's all a personal thing, because a trophy to me may not be a trophy to you, and a trophy to you may not be a trophy to Michael Waddell or Tim Wells or whoever it may be. It's all a personal thing. And you know what's funny about that, the antler restriction thing? Did you know that the top big buck states, according to the Boone and Crockett's, and the Boone and Crockett is basically like a coveted score for big white-tailed deer antlers in the country. So the top big buck states, and if you guys know these, then number 1 is Wisconsin. Number 2 is Illinois. Number 3 is Iowa. Number 4 is Minnesota. And number 5 is Ohio for the top Boone and Crockett entries in the country. And 9 out of the 10 top big buck states, I only named 5, but the 9 out of 10 of the top 10 big buck states for Boone and Crockett do not have any type of antler restrictions. And you could follow me up on that, and please leave in the comments if I am wrong on that. But I did a lot of research, and 9 out of the 10 big buck states do not have antler restrictions or point restrictions, or vice versa. So if there is no restriction, and these people are just averagely going out passing up young bucks, then that's a great thing. And in the end goal, I think every hunter has a process that they go through, to where when they're a beginner, they shoot anything just to get some under their belt, get that first initial yeehaw, I finally broke the ice. And then it's like, okay, let's try and get a little better. And then they get to the point where they're passing up young bucks, and they're going for a mature buck, so a 4 or 5 year old. That's what they're going for. So they're passing up the 1, 2, and 3 year olds. And then once they get 1 or 2 or 3 of those, or maybe they have a longer process, then they even pass shooter bucks that were for them last year, but now they're going for the 5, 6, 7, 8 year old monster buck. So, and then at that point, the next part of the process would be getting your friends in the hunting and getting them on their first buck and starting them in their process. Because that's basically what I got Rob into. I started him on his process, and him shooting his first deer and his first buck, and the emotions that came out of that almost was better than me shooting a buck for myself. So everyone has that process of meat hunter versus trophy hunter. And you know what? I am very, very, very happy that Rob took a spike for his first buck, so he did not get spoiled. And for the people watching on YouTube, I'm going to put up a little video here of when he took his first doe. Look at the size of the buck behind this doe that comes in. All right, this was like a 140-inch 10-pointer. And I did a deer drive to him to where like 20 deer were in his lap. And this deer comes through. I'm like, Rob, guys, it's winter bow, so you could shoot a buck or a doe. And I pushed this thing through, and I was on the phone with Rob. We had headphones in. I'm like, Rob, this buck is coming. Absolute beast. There's like 30 doe coming through. Just the biggest buck. He's got white antlers. You cannot miss him. He's coming through. And in the video, Rob peeks around the tree. He sees just all the does, and he hasn't shot a deer yet. He peeks around this tree, and I don't know if he saw the buck or not. He says he didn't see it in some stories. And then in some stories he says, yeah, I saw it, but the doe in front of him was just broadside, perfect shot. And I just wanted to get my first deer under my belt. I didn't care what it was. I wanted meat, and I wanted to get the feeling, just the initial buck fever, the curse out of the way of me getting my first buck. So he says he took that shot instead of the big buck. When I think if he just leaned a little more out from that tree, he'd have a 140-inch 10-pointer sitting on the wall. So it comes down to a personal thing. Because if it was me and I saw that buck coming through the woods, or if I had intel from a driver telling me that a giant was coming through, I'd hold out for that giant buck. But then there's days that I go out there and I'm like, I just want meat. I just want meat. That's all I want. So we do doe drives, and if a doe comes in range and it comes close and I could get a shot, I'm taking that shot because I love the taste of venison. Right now in Florida, I took my buck from this year and Rob's buck from this year, or last year actually, from 2021. From fall bow. I took that down to Florida, and I have like 7 steaks left. So I'm running low on venison, but because I have venison probably once a week and sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. I love the taste of venison, and I love the people that say that they don't like venison because it's gamey. Because if you say venison is gamey, then you are cooking it wrong, or you're having the wrong piece of meat. So if you are introducing someone to venison, please give them like a taste of the backstrap, or a taste of the inner tenderloin, or give them something very good. If you're going to like make ground meat, please make a chili or an empanada, something very, very good for them. So they're going to be like, really? Because I always have people that go, I've had a venison in the past and I really don't like it. It's very gamey, it's very textury, and I had to chew on it forever. And I'm like, not the way I cook it. Let me cook you some. And then when I cook it, they're hesitant because they only know a bad piece of meat that they had in the past. And then they eat it and they're like, oh my God, this thing is the best thing I ever had in my life. And one of the first times I gave Rob deer meat is when we shot a deer, and within an hour of it being harvested and gutted and processed, the deer was still hanging. I'm like, Rob, you hungry? He's like, hell yeah. So while the deer was hanging, I cut out the inner tenderloins, so behind the guts on the backside. So if you have the back straps on top, the inner tenderloins are on the inside of the cavity, and you cut them out. And to some people, they just throw that in the chopped meat, and I think you guys are insane. Take them things out, put that in a pan, butter and garlic, and baste it, and just baste it and baste it. Serve it rare or medium rare, and oh my God, it just falls apart in your mouth. I think that's one of Rob's most favorite meals, and that's like a tradition, because it's not a lot of meat, that cut on a deer, so it's just like a snack. So that's kind of like a tradition. When you shoot a deer, we just take out the inner tenderloins and throw it in a pan, and then we cut it up, and then we share it with the whole hunting party that's helping out. So that would be like me, Rob, Naz, old Ray. I know you're listening, Ray, back in Jersey. Enjoy the snow. And then it would be like Tyler and just like everyone else out there, just everyone just sitting around the fire with a deer hanging, enjoying some nice venison. So that's kind of how that goes about it with meat hunter versus trophy hunter. I feel like we got a little bit off topic, but I think you guys are getting the gist of it. And I feel like a lot of people are going to start going towards meat hunter in general. I've talked about how the COVID crisis affected like the meat shelves and how people just want to fill their freezer. I think it's a smart thing to try filling your freezer and having a security in your mind to where, like, if the meat shells run out, I have a stockpile of venison or elk meat or pheasant or fish just in my freezer because I took the initiative and I went out and I harvested my own food. That would be much better than anything you buy in the store because it has no preservatives, no nothing. And as long as you take care of the meat, then, well, first off, you're going to know exactly how it's prepped, how it's cared for, which is huge on my book because you don't know what all this meat goes through at like a Walmart or a ShopRite or a Publix or wherever it may be. You don't know what that meat goes through, how long it was just like refrigerated versus frozen, if it was frozen, and then if it got like too warm and then they threw it back in the refrigerator. So you don't know how good or bad it is or how old it is. I mean, they tell you how old it is, but you don't know how it's treated from A to B. At least when you get a deer down, you know exactly how it was killed humanely and in its most natural environment out there, eating grass and berries and leaves and whatever it may be eating, just naturally, and you harvested it one shot, hopefully, and then from that point on, you know how it's gutted, you know how the hide comes off, and then you quarter it, and then you take the silver skin off, and then you freezer wrap it and seal it, and you know that meat is going to be good, great, and amazing. So I think that's where a lot of people are going to start doing this because everyone wants to know where their food is coming from now, especially. I feel like that's the new trend. Everyone wants to know where their food is coming from. So like they're starting to garden and they're starting to get their own. A lot of people are starting with fishing. So they're taking like trout or panfish or just any type of fish in general, and they're starting to eat from there because they know it's a high source of protein, yada, 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 which I am all for. I think if you guys are on a big health binge and you guys have a giant garden trying to grow your own vegetables and everything else, then I highly suggest getting into fishing and hunting for the rest of your diet instead of just the vegetables and the greens. So, yeah, so meat hunter versus trophy hunter. Me, I would say I'm right in the middle, maybe a little more on the trophy hunter side because I will pass up certain deer. So if you're selective in any rhyme or reason, then you're technically more of a trophy hunter. But I don't like how trophy hunter sounds because there's a lot of negative stigma around the term trophy hunter because you're just trying to kill the oldest on its last leg animal and you're willing to pay buku dollars to kill this thing. When in all reality, I will go to public land and try and do whatever I can on public land, and I don't have to spend a dime for it, even though you just have to pay for your tag and everything else. So I wish they came up with a different term for trophy hunter, maybe called it like a more mature hunter. It's like you're trying to shoot the more mature animal, not a trophy. So because trophy you kind of just associate with hanging on your wall or putting on your shelf, and that's like the last 5% of it. The whole other part of the experience and memory is the whole 95%, and that's what makes up the whole thing. So just being able to look at them and having a story behind it and it being there for your grandkids and your kids, your grandkids, and down the line, as long as it's taken care of, there's always be a story behind it. So the mount and the taxidermy is the last 5% of it, because in the end of the day, you can't eat the antlers. I know you guys love that saying, you can't eat the antlers. So that about wraps it up, guys. It's time for another cup of Black Rifle coffee. I'm drinking Freedom Roast again today because it's Freedom Friday, baby. It's always got to be that way. So it's off to the gym, and I hope you guys were enjoying your day so far, whether you're at work, at the gym, eating breakfast, or sitting on the toilet, sitting on the couch. But please get up and do something. Don't be lazy. Run around the block or just walk around the street. Go to the gym, get a new personal best weight lift, or just do something. Don't be lazy. Don't be stagnant. Get up, move around, shoot your bow, shoot a gun, sight something in. Just do something for me. I am Mike with Obviously Outdoorsmen. Thank you for listening to FLT number 8, Meat Hunter or Trophy Hunter. Tune in tomorrow for FLT number 9 on Saturday morning. Thank you, guys. Enjoy your Friday. Peace.